Back in the 1920s, rumors spread about a train on the old railroad that ran through Missouri, a train that was never supposed to exist. This train, they said, was a hybrid of the living and the dead, of ghosts and people, and only those brave enough to cross its path could feel the weight of its terrible curse. Mark Ridley, a young journalist, arrived in a small town on the western edge of Missouri, seeking intriguing stories for his newspaper. He had heard the local rumors about the dead train. The train, they said, appeared on the night of January 1st, 1923, and had been traveling the same route every year since, but its passengers disappeared as soon as it entered the fog. Mark's curiosity was boundless, and he decided to investigate. He met an old man named Jackson, who claimed to be a witness to that fateful night. Jackson told Mark that the train had never been ordinary. The locals said it was tied to a chilling story. On the night the train last entered the tunnel, it vanished from the maps, and the town was left with an extra passenger, a massive black shadow on the horizon. Several weeks had passed since Mark's meeting with Jackson. He continued to search through old records and guidebooks. There was no mention of the railroad that once ran through the forested mountains north of the town. Yet, the locals swore that every year, on the coldest winter nights, they would hear the rumble of a train. It moved along the tracks, but never stopped, as though it were following those brave enough to approach its route. Mark decided to spend the night at the station where the train was rumored to appear. He set up a camera and recorded everything happening around him. At midnight, as the fog enveloped the land, something strange occurred. A light appeared on the horizon. At first faint, then brighter, until it became blinding. The train rushed into the station, but it wasn't what Mark had expected. It was black, gleaming, with dim lights and the eerie screech of metal. Mark was so stunned that he forgot to turn on his camera. The train passed, and within seconds, it disappeared into the fog, leaving behind only the cold, lifeless air. It was not just a train, it was something else, something that should not exist. The next day, shaken by what he had witnessed, Mark decided to continue his investigation to uncover the mysteries surrounding this place. He learned that many of the disappearances on the railroad were connected to thefts, accidents, and strange events that were never reported in the papers. However, one story caught his attention. In 1898, a train traveling through the mountains had failed to stop, and its crew and passengers were found dead, but their bodies were never found. Instead, there were tracks leading into the deep forest, and no one ever returned. The townsfolk always avoided talking about these events, especially the old railroad workers who once worked on that line. But for some reason, a few weeks ago, one of them, an old man named Tom, confessed that he knew the truth. Tom revealed that the train was part of an ancient ritual once connected to magic and the occult. Originally used for transporting people, the train had become linked to the world of the dead after a group of unknown individuals cursed the railroad. The following days saw Mark delving deeper into the mystery, but every time he got closer to the answer, new riddles appeared. The train continued to appear, but no passengers were ever seen. It moved like a shadow, mysterious and silent, stopping only in the most remote, inaccessible places. One day, while sitting in the local library, Mark stumbled upon an old list of missing persons that had been kept by the railroad since 1875. Among the names were people who had disappeared over the years, but there were two striking similarities. They all traveled on dark winter nights, and they all vanished after boarding the train. The mysterious disappearances pushed Mark to leave his mark on history and figure out who or what was behind this curse. But the more he learned, the more he felt the darkness closing in around him. The day came when Mark decided to spend the night right where the strange events had occurred, the railroad, where he had already encountered unimaginable phenomena. He set up camp near a bridge that had once been an important part of the train's route. As noon passed, the fog began to thicken, and breathing became harder. Then, at midnight, he felt the air turn dense, cold, and unbearable. Suddenly, he saw it. The train appeared on the horizon, just like before, with bright lights, a roar, and metal merging with the fog. It moved at an incredible speed, as if it were rushing to some final destination hidden in the darkness. Mark's heart raced as he tried to move closer, but then something pierced the fog. He felt his feet freeze in place, and strange, horrifying thoughts began to swirl in his mind. This was no ordinary encounter with a train. This was something far more terrifying than Mark had ever imagined. A shadow appeared before him, an almost imperceptible figure, but it seemed to compress the space around it. It was not just a shadow, it was a being that existed only in the darkest corners of the mind and the ghostly reality. And now, it was coming toward him. In that moment, everything thickened, and Mark realized that there would be no turning back. The shadow continued to approach Mark, and his heart froze in his chest. It seemed to move with a gliding, almost imperceptible gait, yet in a way that felt heavy and unpredictable. Faint, barely audible footsteps echoed in his head, creating an eerie sensation that the world around him had become part of a nightmare. His legs began to buckle, and his breathing grew harder and harder. He tried to stand, but something kept him rooted in place, like invisible chains. The shadow drew closer, and its contours became clearer. It was the figure of a person, but without any details, its face hidden in the darkness, its movements too fluid, too unnatural. He felt the cold grip his body, and then a voice echoed in his mind, "You can't escape." It wasn't a real word. It was a whisper in his mind, a voice that seemed both his own and someone else's, piercing his soul. Mark tried to step back, but before he could make a move, the shadow vanished into the fog, as if it had never existed. In the same instant, the fog thickened, and the distant rumble of the train reached his ears again. This was no ordinary train. This was something that didn't belong to this world. It was a terror that awakened every time someone dared to walk its path. The next morning, Mark returned to the town, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer in the same world he had once inhabited. He heard the train's rumble even when he stood alone in his room, and he knew the curse was following him. With each passing day, he lost confidence in his ability to return to a normal life. His eyes grew darker, and every rustle, every glance, every movement around him felt unnatural, foreign. That evening, Mark met Jackson at the local tavern, hoping to learn more. Jackson grew uneasy when Mark recounted his experiences. "You don't understand," the old man said, downing his drink. "This train isn't just a curse. It's a gate that tears through the boundary between worlds. Those who board it never return. They ride into the void, to a place where there is no time or space." Mark knew the old man was holding back, that he knew more than he was saying. He felt fear growing in his chest. With every word Jackson spoke, the truth became more horrific. "You have to stop this before it's too late," Jackson added. "You're not alone. There are others who tried, but no one returned. This curse tears at the fabric of this world, and it can't be defeated by ordinary means. To find a way out, you must find the gates." "What gates?" Mark asked. "The ones that open with the train. You need to find them and stop them. But be careful, or you'll become part of what it takes." Mark decided to return to the place where he had first encountered the train, hoping to understand what lay behind the curse. Every day, his condition worsened. He was exhausted, his thoughts jumbled, and he no longer knew what was real and what was a product of his imagination. On the night of January 13th, the coldest and foggiest night yet, Mark found himself once more on the railroad. He heard the train approaching. First a faint sound, then growing louder, until it filled his entire being. A blinding light illuminated his face, and as the train neared, he felt the cold envelop him, seeping into his bones. He realized that he had to board the train if he were to discover what lay behind the curse. Only then could he find the answers. When the doors of the train swung open, Mark stepped inside. Everything inside was dark, and only fog filled the space. Soon, he understood that the train wasn't moving, it was trapped in some unknown void. "You've chosen your path," a voice echoed, but it wasn't human, it was a dark, penetrating sound that gripped his entire consciousness. Suddenly, the train lurched forward, and the world outside it began to disappear. Mark found himself in a void where there was no time, no space, no life. As the train entered the void, Mark noticed strange figures beginning to appear around him. They were blurry, like shadows, and their faces were impossible to make out. These figures moved through the train, whispering something, but their voices were barely audible. They were passengers, but not alive. They were part of this world, existing in it and outside of it simultaneously. Mark tried to speak to them, but no one answered. He felt the void begin to consume his mind. And then, among the figures, he noticed one man, a man who looked alive, like Mark. The man approached him. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. "I was like you, but now I am part of this place. This train didn't just carry us. It consumes us, and soon you will disappear too." Mark felt his breath grow heavy. He didn't know whether this was just a nightmare or if his soul had already become part of this place. The train suddenly came to a halt. Everything became quiet. Mark stood up and approached the window, but there was nothing outside, only the void. He understood then that he had become part of this world, the endless, dark void. And now he was just as much a ghost as all the other passengers aboard the train. When he turned around, his eyes met those of the same shadows that had been moving through the train. But now, they were different. They had become part of him, part of this world that had always taken those who dared to board the cursed train. And now he was the last passenger who would never return home. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and watch my other videos.